The Israelis used 2,000-pound bunker buster bombs in Central Beirut for the first time. No reason, like incinerated it, made a crater in the ground in a really densely populated area. They've been hitting an area called Dahieh, south suburb of Beirut, and that's been largely emptied of people. I mean, there's still some people there, but because Israel's been relentlessly bombing it, this is the area Israel destroyed in 2006. This is where they assassinated Hassan Nasrallah in September, taking out 6 residential buildings. Over 1 million people in Lebanon have been displaced since September. Israeli officials have threatened to, due to Lebanon, what they've been doing in Gaza. Hezbollah intervened to try to stop a genocide, been able to hold off an Israeli invasion of southern Lebanon. They haven't managed to hold a single village. International law does not protect civilians right now in any of these places. The only thing that does is the military forces on the ground who are able to push back this tiny group of elites that want to maintain US hegemony around the world. Literally parasite off of the entire world so their countries can be in luxury while like half the world lives in destitution. When are you going to cut trade ties with Israel?
Hello and welcome to episode 135 of the Palestine Pod, the weekly podcast where we break down the latest headlines dealing with Palestine from all over the world and bring you stories, commentary, and interviews with the aim of supporting the Palestinian struggle for decolonization, justice, and equal rights. I'm one of your hosts, Lara E. You might know me from Instagram as @GazaGirl, and I'm joined by my co-host, Mikey B.
What's up, y'all? Mikey B on TikTok, Michael Schertzer on Instagram, and you can call me Mikey Intifada if you caught one of your own airstrikes.
Before we get into today's episode, please like, comment, subscribe if you hang out with us on YouTube. If you're listening on a podcast app, subscribe and leave a review. As always, you can find our full episodes and sources on PalestinePod.com. And if you want to get involved in the conversation, reach out to us at PalestinePod@gmail.com and give us a follow on Instagram @ThePalestinePod. You can also find us on Patreon, where you get early access to the Palestine Pod episodes and additional podcasts per week. And we're also hosting our monthly Zoom happy hours with our Patreon subscribers only. So check us out on patreon.com/PalestinePod.
Today's guest is acclaimed journalist from Breakthrough News, one of our favorites, Rania Khalek.
Oh, thank you so much, you guys. Really appreciate you inviting me.
Yeah, so there was just another large massacre by the occupation. You are in Lebanon right now. How are you feeling and what are your immediate reactions?
Great question. I've been here for like 4 days. I just got back. So I live in Lebanon, but I left completely coincidentally. I mean, obviously I had no idea, but I left a few days, like 2 or 3 days before the pager explosions back in September, before everything took like a dramatic escalation. So being back has been a bit jarring because it's definitely very different for me because I saw it 2 months ago and I'm seeing it now. And it's just, I mean, it's still the same place, but it's just weird. Like every day you kind of navigate, where might there be airstrikes? Like, how do you navigate where you're going to drive, you know, and like what to expect? You don't really know what to expect, but there's sort of patterns that have developed. So there's a lot of like navigating Israeli airstrikes, like it's a weather forecast, but you're really just guessing, honestly. Like you're just kind of hoping there's some logic to it. There's no logic, but on top of that, there's just drones all the time. Like that's really, it's just buzz. It's right happening right now, but I have AirPods in, so it's like noise controlled. So right now it sounds kind of peaceful. It looks like I just can't hear the drone outside. There's a lot of displaced people, and it's really noticeable because over 1 million people in Lebanon have been displaced since September. It's a really small country. Lebanon's just under 6 million people. So to have a fifth of the country, or like almost a quarter of this country displaced, that means everybody's just pushed into smaller spaces. So you see it, and it just, there's tension as a result. Like people, it's not, you know, people aren't displaced for good reasons. Like they're displaced because they've lost their homes or their areas being bombed. So it's just really stressful. You can feel stressed, and just all the, you know, normal kind of loud noises of Beirut mixed in with the drones, a lot of people, so much more traffic. And then the occasional Israeli airstrike. I mean, last night, guys are talking to me, the literally like afternoon after overnight last night at 4 a.m., the Israelis apparently used 2,000-pound bunker buster bombs in Central Beirut for the first time. So they've been hitting an area called Dahieh, which is the south suburb, literally what it means, suburb of Beirut. And that's been largely emptied of people. I mean, there's still some people there, but because Israel's been relentlessly bombing it, this is the area Israel like destroyed in 2006 as well. This is where they assassinated Hassan Nasrallah by dropping 85 2,000-pound bunker buster bombs back in September and taking out 6 residential buildings. So last night they destroyed, and overnight. So I want people to really think about what that means. I mean, I know they've been doing this in Gaza as well, but like at 4 a.m. when people are sleeping, they just destroyed an entire residential building for no reason, like incinerated it, made a crater in the ground in a really densely populated area. It was about 10 minutes from where I am. I could, you know, everyone here where I am in the part of Beirut I am felt it, heard it, because it was so loud, and it's really scary. Like that shit's really scary. Sorry. Anyway, so adjusting to that has been unpleasant. But also like there was another kind of stress I had being in the US for the last 2 months where I was just like every 2 minutes checking news updates. I'm still checking news updates, but I'm here. So, so being here right now is like a weird dystopia. It's like 1 second you're chatting with friends and like enjoying yourself and forgetting there's a war. And the next second, Israel levels an entire residential building full of families and a lot of people are dead. And it's just horrifying. You
spoke about how Israel leveled an entire residential building filled with families in the middle of the night. And this is a pattern that they unleashed in Gaza, right? So they use this AI called Where's Daddy, which after having marked Palestinians for being targeted, decides to kill them once they enter their homes in the evening. And so that's why a lot of the airstrikes are happening at night. And that's why you have so many women and children being killed, because the so-called targets are being taken out with their families at night in the place where they are sleeping. And that's why all of the videos that you're seeing of these children arriving to the hospitals in Gaza show children in their pajamas, because they were literally being airstriked in the middle of the night while they slept. So that's just one of the ways in which what Israel is doing in Lebanon now mirrors what they have already done in Gaza. I referred to it previously as Israel copying and pasting and exporting the genocide, because even the rhetoric that they use towards Lebanon is the same genocidal rhetoric that they have been using in Gaza. We also saw a wounded child, no surviving family in Lebanon, right? This was the acronym that was created to describe the phenomenon of children whose entire families have been massacred. So I'm wondering, do you see that what is happening in Lebanon now is very much a similar policy to what Israel's doing in Gaza, or do you think there are differences, and if so, what are they?
There are similarities and there are differences. And you mentioned copy and pasting, and actually that was a direct threat from, I think it was former Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant sometime last year, where he said, we're going to take a map of Beirut and copy and paste Gaza onto Beirut. Since October 8th, Israeli officials have every single day threatened to do to Lebanon what they've been doing in Gaza. And there has been like this tit for tat that's been taking a place between Hezbollah and Israel since October 8th of last year, when Hezbollah intervened to try to stop a genocide by targeting the Shabaa farms, which is actually illegally occupied Lebanese land. And there's been like a tit for tat ever since. And obviously like things escalated dramatically in September after those pager attacks. Israel clearly got some sort of green light from the US, because until then they were reined in a bit to just escalate dramatically in Lebanon. And a lot of what they're doing, they're using a lot of the same weapons, a lot of the same policies. Yeah, you're seeing entire buildings destroyed, leveled to the ground with people inside of them, particularly at night without any warning. Also seeing them do that with warnings, trying to use that as cover for OC. We're actually like really polite and nice because we gave people a 20-minute warning on X to evacuate their home that we're now going to destroy. They did this in Gaza with like certain buildings, like municipal buildings and these sorts of things. In Lebanon, actually something that they've done in Lebanon that they didn't do in Gaza, probably because Lebanon's a bit more spread out. The south is not as like densely populated like a city. It's a lot of like villages with a lot of farmland, but also a lot of homes. They've taken these villages on the border and detonated. They've literally like put explosives of every single house and detonated the entire village at once. You guys have seen those videos of that. So that's, just completely, I don't even know, like demonic on top of everything else they've been doing. Obviously, like attacking medical personnel has been very similar to what we've seen in Gaza, especially in hospitals across the south and across hospitals in Baalbek and Nabatieh. And, actually killing, they've killed, I think, 200 or around either a little less than 200 or perhaps, the last time I looked at that number was a week ago. So it could have actually gotten over 200 at this point. They've killed 200 at least medical personnel across Lebanon. So they're actively targeting hospitals and medical professionals, especially like rescue workers. But now, so a lot of the same things that we're seeing in Gaza are taking place. The difference with Lebanon is Lebanon's a lot bigger. It's a country, right? Gaza is this like tiny, densely populated strip of land on the coast. Lebanon's a country. It has more geographic depth. And, Israel doesn't look at Lebanon as all Hezbollah. Maybe some Israelis do, but like the way that they look at Gaza as all Hamas, right? Lebanon, they look at areas as Hezbollah areas, which is still a ridiculous way to talk about people's neighborhoods. So there are areas of Lebanon where different political parties are in charge. And some of those political parties are pro-American and in some cases pro-Israel. So those areas that are like basically pro-American, the political parties in those areas that are pro-American or pro-Israel are largely untouched. And a lot of displaced people have gone to those areas as a result because those are considered safe places. So I guess all that's to say, is anywhere safe at the end of the day? No, really no. But there are places that are safer than other places in a way that you don't have with Gaza. Like there are places to flee to, for now at least, in Lebanon. So that's different. Lebanon also, because it's a country, it has a government that like has a parliament. It has embassies, including Western embassies, including an American embassy. It has European and American well, I don't know about American. It has European diplomats. It has US funded universities. It has the American University of Beirut, the Lebanese-American University. It has American, anything is possible, but like it's less likely Israel's going to start hitting the American University of Beirut hospital. That's like an institution of the United States. So it's that you don't have that in Gaza. That said, in Gaza, like I know there were some European funded things that got hit. So, who knows? Nothing is a guarantee, but Lebanon has a little bit more, I don't want to use the word protection, but it's not as, the devastation is not as widespread the way you would see in Gaza. And there's a reason for that. Gaza is a genocide. Lebanon has a lot of sectarian hatred being implemented against specifically Shia communities in Lebanon. And you could consider what Israel's doing across the south, especially the southern border village, as a form of ethnic cleansing. But Israel is not trying to genocide all of Lebanon the way it's doing to Gaza. Also, its military goals in Lebanon are different. In Gaza, it's literally to turn it into an apocalypse and take it over and like kill as many Palestinians as possible. Whereas in Lebanon, it's to eliminate the threat of Hezbollah firing missiles into northern Israel so their settlers can go back to the north. So they have different goals. They're even saying their goals are different. And they'd love to occupy southern Lebanon. They have before, but there are military leaders in Israel and some political leaders who recognize that that is a far more difficult task than destroying Gaza and annexing the West Bank. So there's also some, practical considerations when it comes to how the Israelis deal with Lebanon. And then there's also Hezbollah. Hezbollah's been weakened, but it's still a pretty tough fighting force. It's been able to hold off an Israeli invasion of southern Lebanon. And this is a massive invasion attempt by something like 70 or 80,000 Israeli soldiers. It's the biggest attempt ever towards Lebanon or anywhere that Israel's ever tried to invade. And it's been going on for almost 2 months, and they haven't managed to hold a single village. They've destroyed a lot, but they haven't managed to hold anything. So when we talk about Hezbollah, we're dealing with a far more powerful, well-equipped, well-armed force than the kind of resistance you have in Gaza, because Gaza's completely sealed off from the world in a way that Lebanon hasn't been. And Hezbollah is just larger and has access to better weapons and has been around in terms of like a military force, becoming more powerful and more experienced a lot longer.
Amazing. Thank you so much for that. As of a week ago, these are the losses of the Israeli military on that southern Lebanon front. 43 destroyed Merkava tanks, over 1,000 injured, over 100 dead. 2 armored vehicles destroyed, 2 Humvees destroyed, 8 military bulldozers destroyed, 2 downed, 900 drones, 4 downed, 450 drones, and 2 destroyed personnel carriers. We also heard from Ali Mortada this morning that the occupation has bombed its own soldiers in an effort to stop them from getting captured. The Hannibal directive that they also did October 7th. What can we say? Is there anybody that they can't kill, I think, is the question.
The Israelis.
Yeah.
Is there anybody they can't kill? They can kill whoever they want. They always keep pushing the envelope, I guess. They're probably going to shy away from killing like Western diplomats. Though with the new ICC verdict, with the new ICC verdict, who knows? Look, I think that it's really important to recognize the losses by the Israelis you just mentioned. Is it enough to stop them? Not yet. But that said, like the Israelis, I also think it's interesting what you just said. I actually didn't know they'd killed their own soldiers. That's news to me, what you just said about them killing their own soldiers in southern Lebanon. I'm not surprised though, because it's so interesting. Israeli society has changed, because I think there was a time when the fear of being hit and killed and having their soldiers killed acted as a deterrent force against Israel, particularly with Lebanon. But you have an Israel today that is has a lot higher threshold for what its officials and its people are willing to put up with in terms of losses on their side, to the point where they're willing to kill their own soldiers to prevent them from becoming hostages. Well, hostage is a nice word to use, prisoners of war. So that, I think, changes the dynamic with Israel and makes it actually a significantly more dangerous country. Like all this time, the Israelis always like to say about Arabs that what they love, they hate us more than they love their children. And it's like, it kind of seems like that's pure projection. Like you actually hate Arabs more than you care about your own people. So they're willing to take a lot more losses. That said, I think they will reach their limit at some point. And they do recognize that it's not sustainable. It's not sustainable to continue to try to invade Lebanon. It's going to be winter soon. It gets cold in some of these areas. It gets like snowy in some of these areas. And also, if they have this agenda to like keep destroying Gaza, where there still is resistance hitting them, and to continue to do all this insane stuff in the West Bank, like this is too many fronts. Like you don't have enough human resources to continue doing this forever. So you're going to have to lighten up somewhere. And I imagine the somewhere is probably going to be Lebanon, because that's the most difficult place to hit. In the meantime, Hezbollah is prepared for the long war. And I don't think there's anyone who's necessarily safe from the Israeli death machine. I think they have people higher up on their list of priority in terms of targets. But like, I don't think anybody should be walking around feeling like because they're a Western diplomat, they're across limits. This is an insane rogue country that it's like there's no red lines and there's nothing they're not willing to try.
This reminds me of at the beginning of the genocide in Gaza when I believe it was Lindsey Graham maybe or another American congressperson who was asked if there were any red lines for Israel, and the answer was no. It was an express answer that there are no red lines, which is a very clear statement that international law does not matter, does not bind Israel's conduct in any way, nor do American politicians expect Israel to abide by those norms. It's a very clear understanding. I want to go to something that you said, which I found very interesting, about the death of Yahya Sinir. You said that New York Times said that the death of Mr. Sinir would raise hopes of an end to the conflict. And you wrote, they don't get it. Israel's genocidal project isn't about this or that leader. It's about stealing land and dominating the natives. This conflict, as the New York Times calls it, will never end as long as Israel remains a settler colony carrying out expansionist genocide. The natives will always fight back. You said that the NYT line about Sinir shows how dumb and delusional Israel supporters remain. I totally agree with everything you said. I wonder, do you think that the media truly does not understand and that they are printing what they actually believe? Or do you think that they understand, but it's a very conscious effort to shape the narrative in such a way that confuses people?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would love to poll them and get an honest answer. I think likely it's probably a mix. I think there's probably people who are like delusional liberals who want to believe in Zionism still and think that like there can totally be this Jewish state that's like under threat. It's a perpetual victim. And that if only Palestinians and Lebanese and Yemenis and Iraqis and like all the Arabs would just stop being so violent, everybody could sing Kumbaya and things would be fine. And like, I even heard this interview between Ezra Klein and Ta-Nehisi Coates. And Ezra Klein is kind of the perfect example of what I'm talking about, because he was basically like conceding that Israel's run by a bunch of crazy right-wingers who are genocidal, but it's Palestinians that made them that way, because Palestinian violence during the Second Intifada destroyed the peace movement and the labor movement in Israel and gave them no other choice but to turn into violence. And it's like, I do think there's people who buy into that narrative, stupid white people buy into that narrative because it makes them feel good. And I think it's something that they can like relate to in terms of how they see the world, right? If you just stop resisting, everything will be fine. But of course, that starts the timeline in the wrong place and totally pretends like there isn't this larger project that has existed since before Israel's creation to do exactly what you quoted me saying they want to do, which is to remove as many Arabs as possible from land so they can create a Jewish state in an area that is not majority Jewish. And the only way to do that is to continue to carry out humongous acts of violence perpetually forever, because you know what? People will never stop resisting that ever. And you're just never going to have, you're just never going to have as many Jews in the Levant as you do Arabs. It's just not, it doesn't work like that demographically. So the only way this can happen is to keep ethnically cleansing, to keep committing genocide, to keep bombing and massacring. And that's what Zionism is all about. If this really was some like land without a people for a people without a land, whatever that BS line we hear, if that was the case, you wouldn't need to carry out all this violence because there wouldn't be people in your way. But there are people in your way. And that's what happens with settler colonialism. And that's what people like Ezra Klein and other liberals at these mainstream American media outlets either don't understand or refuse to understand because they're just blinded by their own worldview, their own privilege, and their own entitlement. But I also think there's something more nefarious going on. And that is exactly what you said. Yes, there are people who understand and they're covering up for Israel. That's absolutely happening. Like at this point, I have no people inside media outlets. Headlines do get changed. The writing does get changed. There are policies about what you're allowed to say and how you're supposed to describe things and what you can't say. We know that. The Intercept has written about that, especially when it comes to the New York Times. There is also this effort by all these corporate-owned media outlets to basically do PR for Israel. In some cases, like they actually have to run their articles or videos by the Israelis before they're allowed to air them because of Israel's military censor.
Example of that, Bloomberg's headline for when the ICC issued an arrest warrant for Putin said, International Criminal Court issues arrest warrant for Putin war crimes. Same exact headline for the ICC issuing arrest warrants for Netanyahu, except this time war crimes are in quotes.
It's incredible because look, there's some individuals who have ideological agendas, and then there's editors who do, and then there's outlets that will filter out any actual truth. But I have reported in the Middle East, I see the way some of these correspondents operate, and I'm not putting a general blanket on all of them at all, but I've seen the way some of them operate. They lie sometimes. They actually lie sometimes because they have an agenda. They come to this region and they are like ideologues. They are imperialist ideologues who think that America is right and America's allies are right, and anything opposed to that is bad and evil. And they will frame their entire narrative that way. They are very selective with who they quote. They won't even go to certain areas, like a lot of the journalists. And again, I'm not saying this is a blanket statement. They're not all like this, but there's a chunk of them who, when they come in Lebanon, they don't speak Arabic. They don't, and it's so funny because could you ever imagine like hiring somebody for like a Middle Eastern outlet to go cover DC? They don't speak English. That would be crazy, right? But that happens here. So they don't speak Arabic. They can't read it. They can't write it. And I know I read Arabic very slowly, so I'm not saying I'm perfect here, but like, if I'm not the bureau chief of a major American media outlet, and I actually just live here and I'm Lebanese. But like, if you're going to hire a bureau chief, don't speak Arabic, and they live in a neighborhood that's run by a fascist political party that loves America, loves Israel, and hates any resistance, and hates Syrians, hates Palestinians. Like, that's how it is here. So those are the people you're surrounded by, like a neighborhood full of a lot of people with opinions that just reflect and validate what you think about the region. And like, so you're only speaking to a certain group of people, certain elites. You've already picked a side. You're not being truthful about what you're seeing. And that's how you end up with this insane, like, reporting. And it's not every journalist, but that contributes to the narrative, the BS narrative that we see in the mainstream media, is some of these on the ground reporters. There's also some really great ones. So I want to be clear. There's some really, really great correspondents who are truthful in their reporting. Some of their headlines get changed. But it's really a mixed bag. But like, I've also seen some really awful ones, and not just in Lebanon, but in Syria as well. They do the same thing in Iraq as well. Like, it's all like these, they're just conditioned to be like American imperialists, and they go and project that onto their reporting and how they view the region and who they talk to.
It's very colonial.
Mm-hmm.
The approach to media is very colonial, right? So it's no surprise that you get the types of headlines that you do. Sometimes they're not even English when you try to decipher what is meant. They refer to refugee camps as densely populated areas. They always say that Palestinians say, or, they say an airstrike hit a building. They always sow doubt in, the narrator of the crime, and they never tell you who's responsible for the crime to begin with. So much, and I think it's very clear, right? When you look at some of these headlines, to understand that there is an attempt to cover for Israel, right?
Yeah.
And I think right now we're facing a little bit of a reckoning now with the issuance of the arrest warrants by the ICC. For so many reasons. It's as Palestinians, this isn't going to lead us directly to freedom. This isn't going to settle the 76 years worth of crimes that we have been undergoing. This isn't going to allow us to affirm our self-determination rights in Palestine. So for so many reasons, it's a fragmented form of justice, even with respect to the ongoing genocide, right? It's not the fault of only two people. It's not the fault of only Netanyahu and Gallant. There are thousands of soldiers who carried out these genocidal acts who also need to be held accountable. But it certainly does represent a shift, a turning point. And I think years from now, we're going to look back on that moment as maybe the beginning of some sort of Israeli accountability for their international crimes. And I'm curious how you see that latest development. Do you agree in that sense that it is a shift in terms of what we've seen historically? Do you think it's going to have an impact on Israel's actions going forwards, whether that be in Gaza or Lebanon? I know as a Palestinian, whenever Palestinians have tried to use international mechanisms in order to assert their rights, we're always punished for it by Israel. So Israel retaliates by killing more of us. But I also wonder if that in and of itself may change once they see the wall closing in on them.
Yeah, I think so. It's funny. I keep going to Yoav Gallant, but I saw, like, because he's, obviously there's an arrest warrant out for him now from the ICC, and he posted on Twitter, he's like at a shooting range, and it just said hashtag Shabbat Shalom or something. And obviously it was like in response to, this arrest warrant, like, oh yeah, he's basically flicking off the world. I do think this is a turning point. I don't think it's going to have an impact anytime soon in terms of like material consequences on Israel's genocide and various, wars across the region. I think it's a part of the other recent developments over the last year that are isolating Israel more and more, especially when it comes to the Europeans. And also, I think it can act as a measure that can cause more rifts between the Europeans and the Americans, which I think is important. Because the European countries, except for like maybe Germany that was wishy-washy about it, basically said, if these people come here, we will have to arrest them. We don't have a choice because Europeans like bureaucracy and rules. And the ICC is all Europe, right? Whereas the US is like talking about, sanctioning not just the ICC, but you had Lindsey Graham today announcing we should also sanction Canada and the UK and Germany and France if they abide by this arrest warrant or like whatever. So I think that's, what, I support that endeavor. For the first time in my life, I agree with Lindsey Graham. Go wild, sanction your allies, do it. It'll cause more rifts between you. So you guys are like not a united front anymore. But yeah, I think this speaks to Israel increasingly becoming a rogue state. And more it's going to contribute to basically giving more space, especially for European countries to act against the Israelis, at least maybe economically. Maybe this will lead to like less economic trade with the Israelis if the sitting prime minister of this psychotic country is wanted for an arrest, is wanted by the ICC, and there's an arrest warrant out for him. I mean, we have to wait and see how that plays out, but I absolutely think it's a significant development. But I also want to, clarify that, I think we all understand now that Israel cannot be and has never been stopped by international law. It's a useful mechanism. It's a useful tool in a larger box. But I just want to say the people who are being killed by Israel have a right to defend themselves with force. And that plays an even more significant role in how the Israelis are going to be able to successfully carry out their genocidal project moving forward. So I think some people think that, maybe less so, but even, before October 7th, there was this like strong belief, even in progressive circles, just stop using violence, guys. Just sit back and sing, like, hold hands and stand there and just let them shoot and kill you. And eventually, like, the world will care enough to stop it with international law. But international law isn't a thing anymore. It's really not. It died a long time ago, but the nails in the coffin have been Gaza. I mean, it's a joke. Nobody takes that seriously. International law does not protect civilians right now in any of these places. The only thing that does is the military forces on the ground who are able to push back even in small ways.
I want to read something you wrote on that. You said, serious question, when has surrender ever stopped Israel? Need I remind you what happened after the PLO surrendered and left Lebanon in 1982? What did Israel's proxies with Israeli protection do to the Palestinians in Sabra and Shatila? The PLO evacuated Lebanon by early September with written assurances from the U.S. that the hundreds of thousands of Palestinian civilians they were leaving behind would be safe. The Zionist Lebanese, with the Israeli help, murdered 3,500 defenseless Palestinians in 2 days. Never ever believe U.S. assurances.
And I think it's really important. Like, anybody who doesn't know about the details of Sabra and Shatila, a lot of us who followed Palestine and are in the sort of pro-Palestine movement know there was this horrific massacre and the Israelis oversaw it. But that happened after a surrender. There was no one who had weapons to defend women and children from massacre by machetes in some cases for 2 days straight. So that is why when it comes to the idea of putting down your weapons and raising the white flag, I mean, look at Gaza right now. People are putting down, they don't even have weapons. They're just putting up a white flag and trying to like flee a hospital, and the Israelis shoot them. Like, there is no such thing as surrender to these people. They surrender for Israel is emboldening them. They are emboldened when you surrender. What surrender to Israel just tells them that you're weak and that they can bulldoze right over you. And so that's why people in this region are not increasingly, they've always been supportive of armed resistance because they understand, like Israel likes to say about Arabs, Israel actually only understands force.
Yeah, I want to thank you for affirming what the UN affirmed a long time ago with Resolution 3743, which is the legitimacy of the struggle of peoples for independence, territorial integrity, national unity, and liberation from colonial and foreign domination and foreign occupation by all available means, including armed struggle. And I want to quote the Palestinian martyr Yahya Sinir. Within a limited period of months, I estimate we make the occupation have two options. Either we force it to implement international law, respect international resolutions, withdraw from the West Bank and Jerusalem, dismantle the settlements, release the hostages, return the refugees. Either we and the world force it to achieve an establishment of a Palestinian state on the lands occupied in 1967, including Jerusalem, or we place the occupation in a state of contradiction and collision with the entire international will and isolate it, end the state, its integration into the region and the entire world. A state of collapse that occurred on all fronts of resistance that have occurred during the past years. So he foresaw.
Yeah. I mean, that was the whole plan here, right? And
Yes.
I think that definitely what we see is the latter being the case. But yeah, I mean, I just don't think the world's ever going to be the same. I don't think the world's view of Israel is ever going to be the same. In the long run, I think Israel already is seen by a majority of the world as a very problematic state, at the very least, with a regime that needs to be dismantled. The problem is we have this world where like the US is the global hegemon and everybody's just terrified of the US and is quite cowardly, honestly, and unwilling to do even the most basic of things. Like at some point, like when are you going to cut trade ties with Israel? Like I'm waiting for that. I'm not sure what else Israel has to do, but that's like another, I guess, conversation to have. I'm pretty pissed at the world right now, you guys.
On the topic of isolation, there was a former Zionist minister who was denied a visa visit to Australia on character grounds. That was actually separate from the genocide stuff.
Oh,
she's just insufferable. No,
Ayla Shaked.
Yeah. Just a little joke. Also, Dearborn, Michigan was the first city to announce that they would arrest Netanyahu and Gallant. So every city should try and be more like Dearborn.
Yeah.
Also, I thought that was very funny because is Netanyahu going to Dearborn? I don't understand.
It does mess up their tour.
Like maybe Kamala Harris was thinking of sending him there to
tell the people why they deserve to die, right?
Yeah.
I said to Michael that I understood that the Democrats wanted to lose when they sent Bill Clinton to Michigan to shame people whose families were being massacred, to tell them why they deserve to die. I was like, oh, you're actually trying to lose. I got it. Okay.
Yeah, I was under the impression that either Kamala Harris's campaign manager hates her, or they were just like, you know what? I think they were trying to appeal to racists. Like, because they're always trying to court Republicans. So maybe that was just them trying to court Republicans. Imagine like losing because Trump, like the Arabs don't like Trump.
No.
But some of them actually, I mean, I don't think this was the wisest thing to do, because why would you vote for Trump? But some people actually had the most simple calculation. They were like, well, we need her to lose. So if you vote for him, that's a vote for him and not her. And I was like, okay. And that's what happened. And it wasn't just them too. It was like all these other groups of people across the US like hate the Democratic Party.
Because they don't actually push forward any meaningful policies whenever they're in power that improve people's lives. And they've never done any of the things that they promised that they will do. They need, in order to win, they need Republicans to be in power so that then they can come in and say, oh, look, it's been terrible for the last 4 years. Vote for us. We're better than what you just experienced. And so because they're constantly the party that defines themselves on the basis of we're the lesser of two evil, we're better than that guy, but we're not good because we actually offer anything good for you. Difficult to win an election when you are trying to win as a Democrat after a Democratic president who's already been in power for 4 years and who's shown us what his policies are domestically and internationally. And that's even what the mainstream analysis was, which was that she didn't differentiate herself enough from Biden. She said, everything's going great. I would do nothing differently, except I'd have a Republican in my cabinet, right? So because that's the way that they work, the only way for them to actually win an election is after a Republican president, in my view, because they always win just by convincing people they're better than what they've just experienced.
Political theater, and that the efforts that we are putting into these elections or these politicians is effort that should be expended elsewhere, right? On direct actions, on mutual aid groups, on things that are making a tangible impact, because like Palestine Action is not sitting around and waiting for these senators to block arms shipment, which we all know they're not going to do. They're all going to put up a big show like it was so hard, but you guys know how the lobby is, so you get it. And it's like, no, we don't care. Like, these bombs need to stop flowing because they are going to use them on people. And we know that.
You spent all this time calling Trump a fascist, right? And like saying it's like the end of America if he wins. And then he gets elected and like they're not doing anything to like, with the little power they have left, put a stop to like the things Trump can continue and make worse of, right? And they're just like peaceful transition. It's like, that's how you know they're on the same team. Because if he actually was a fascist, like, shouldn't you be putting every piece of legislation you possibly can be and doing like executive orders to limit his powers? Instead, you had, what was it, like 52 Democrats, some crazy number, who voted for a bill last week to basically give Trump the authority to, with a signature, strip any nonprofit he wants to of their nonprofit status under the accusation that they support terrorism without actually having to prove they do, which would actually just giving Trump the power to destroy his political enemies.
It was 15 Democrats. Sorry. Just in case you
sorry. I thought it was, the recent one. Then they actually did it again.
Yeah, 15 Democrats in the one from a few days ago.
Still voted for it the second time around. So it passed the House. Who knows if it'll pass the Democratic-led Senate? It's definitely going to pass under Trump's administration. But like, that doesn't mean just defunding, by the way, pro-Palestine groups. That also means defunding the NAACP and like Planned Parenthood, basically anything that Republicans hate. It is giving them the power to bankrupt their political opponents, which is just insane. So I'm like, so you think this guy's a fascist, but you want to give him these extra legal powers and do nothing to stop him in any other realm? It's completely disingenuous, everything they say. And also, like, we shouldn't understate, not that I'm saying you guys are, but these people, these Democratic leaders, oversaw, funded, supported, enthusiastically propagandized for a genocide for a year. I mean, would Republicans have done the same thing? Probably. I'm not suggesting they wouldn't have. But like, you're really, like, they've literally brought us to this parity point of politics where it's like, well, you've got people making the argument that, but under Trump, more Palestinians will be killed. Wouldn't you rather have 2 instead of 200? And are we really talking about what numbers are okay? Like, it's just
I mean, yeah, that's a reflection of the extent to which Palestinian death has been normalized, Lebanese death as well. But the expectation is that we must die. And the question is, how many of us must die? When in reality, the reality is that we must be free. That is the only non-negotiable, unconditional, absolute truth. We must be free. We have rights under international law, which have been denied consistently for 76 years. And the only thing that is the only possible way forward is the full restoration of those rights. So that's why anytime you see the United States engage in language of, a peace process, negotiations, coming to the table, a plan, Trump's approach was his, what was it called? That deal of the century. There we go.
Deal of the century. I was
right. So it's all, my brain is mush after a year of genocide. I don't remember anything.
I hear you.
But this entire approach to Palestinians as if we are a topic to people to be managed, be administered, to be dealt with, but that they will never just acknowledge the reality is that we are being denied our rights. And the only solution to a denial of rights is the restoration of those rights.
Absolutely.
That's it, period. It's unconditional. You cannot negotiate away a people's rights. And the fact that they continue to approach Palestinians in this way, and in the interim, prescribe death for them, label them all as killable until they finally come to their senses and accept subjugation permanently. It really reveals the extent of the dehumanization of Palestinians. And it's a very frightening thing. Of course, people have been dehumanized before. We're not the first group to experience this. But I do think that in this moment, there is something a bit unique about it. When you see Trump get on stage and call Biden a Palestinian as a slur, there are, in my mind, no other people today where you could engage in that type of a direct turning the entire people into a slur. Not to say that Trump himself has not said horrific things about other groups, but it's just to show the extent of the dehumanization of the Palestinian in the national discourse in the US. It has become so normalized that Biden doesn't come back and say, no, that's unacceptable. You cannot label an entire people as something negative. He denies the accusation, right?
How dare you call me Palestinian?
Right?
Yeah. Yeah. You know, I also think there's something to be said about the fact that, like, okay, just a couple thoughts come to mind with what you said. I think it's so interesting how anybody who's a part of a group that has experienced any form of like colonial or imperialist oppression or any sort of racism has a part of Palestine they can identify with, because it just brings all of the horror of the imperialist US-led international order in the worst, most depraved way in this one place called Gaza. And of course, in the West Bank too, but Gaza is just like the worst, right? And that's why you've got people making parallels to the Congo and to Sudan and to the history of slavery in the US and to the Native American genocide and basically every genocide of natives across these
Yes.
countries and places like Australia, where for some reason people are white when that's not actually like what people in that part of the world are supposed to look like. But that's all to say, when it comes to what's happening in Gaza, I really think we need to see it as a few things. It really is a genocidal drive of the US-led international order. Like what happened on October 7th? Palestinians had like an armed revolt against their oppressors. And, you know, everybody was shocked by it. It was this big planned military campaign that was then lied about a lot. But that's all to say, when you're somebody who's in the US government or in the EU parliament or in Germany, in Berlin, like running that government, or in Paris, in France, or in any of these European countries that are allied with the US and are former colonizers themselves, and you see a bunch of brown people shooting at the image of the West in the Middle East, at the settler colony, that's really scary. Like, you don't want people to get ideas. We have a global order that is so horrifically, offensively parasitic, where like a handful of elites led by the US literally parasite off of the entire third world so their countries can be in luxury while like half the world lives in destitution. That's the imperial order that we live in. And Gaza is really like emblematic of that to the most extreme degree imaginable. So you have to shut that shit down if you're in charge of that imperial order. And that's why you see the US willing to go so far and basically just like pretend none of the international laws they ever pretended to like, that those don't exist anymore. Like the way they're treating Palestinians is really like a lens into the future of the way this ruling class of imperialists plans to treat the entire global South, especially as we enter into an era of like climate change and resource wars, and just the fact that they're like willing to go to nuclear war to continue to control the entire world. I think that's what so much of what I just said is what makes Gaza, it should be the number one issue for literally everybody in the world, stopping that genocide and Palestinian liberation, because it is tied up in the subjugation and oppression of everybody else, especially when you consider Gaza as it is, which is a laboratory. Yes. Everything Israel's doing in Gaza is a testing ground for what is planned for controlling people in the future. All of this insane AI technology violence. It's really, really, really horrifying. Not that you should have to feel personally threatened to care about what's happening in Gaza, but it actually is about you. It is about all of us who aren't a part of this tiny group of elites that want to maintain US hegemony around the world.
So this is from one of the Zionist generals. He said to Channel 12 News, "We are paying an impossible situation in Gaza and paying a heavy price. We are prolonging the war and not moving forward to where we can return the prisoners. The current situation is that Hamas is responsible for everywhere the army is not present in the Gaza Strip. The situation is the same as it was before October 7th, 2023. And then obviously the Zionist media mocked Katz's victory speech because it's been one of the bloodiest weeks and months for the occupation army. There are a third of occupation reservists who have served more than 150 days since the start of the war. So they're fatigued. They are having bad morale, obviously, because it's not fun to just like immediately try and invade a Lebanese village and then get your shit rocked. They're usually used to only serving between 21 to 45 days. They are refusing to resume service. They just enlisted. The first enlistment orders for the Orthodox Jews came out. First 1,000 of 7,000 new Haredim enlistment orders was sent out, which sparked large-scale protests. They are experiencing extreme internal turmoil. They are likely to self-combust.
Based on everything you just read, obviously, like, Israel can continue to destroy. They have lots of weapons thanks to our government in the US to keep going on for quite some time. Though I do sometimes wonder, I'm like, when are you going to run out, man? Like, it's just crazy. Like, you can't have this many bombs forever. Go ahead.
I think their kneecaps are ready. I think their
Oh,
knees
yeah?
are trembling. Yeah, I think
Oh,
it's
I love
imminent. And inshallah, like,
Inshallah.
especially with the Lebanese resistance, especially with the multiple fronts from Yemen, from Iraq, from Syria, and I think we're seeing a dynamic shift in the way that people will interact with the occupation in the future. And this court ruling is just one of many cultural shifts, but one that people can start leveraging on a legal basis, right? We now have a legal and a moral obligation, which has existed for a long time, but we now have the legal infrastructure to enforce this obligation to stop the bombs. And so, you know, that does not mean call your representative. They heard the message. I, as somebody who used to work in politics and delivered those messages, they heard the message. They're familiar. Their response was this recent attack on Lebanon, you know, where people were martyred in their sleep. So they've heard it. Don't call them again.
No, it's so insane. I'm glad you said that, because I think that it's really important. It's so doom and gloom right now. Like, it's just because we all see every single day, like, how many more kids' bodies can you like look at torn apart or limbless, or just like these kids are going to be traumatized. The ones who survive, they're like, I don't know how they ever have a normal life after this. It actually makes me think of the Holocaust. Like,
don't have a normal life. Some of them, some of these children, Rania, they've stopped talking. They've had their hair go gray overnight. They've stopped eating. They have night terrors. The amount of psychological torture and distress that the children are in right now in Gaza, but also in Lebanon. I don't think that there's a historical precedent for this amount of destruction and killing in such a short amount of time.
It's a mechanized Holocaust from the air. And that's what's crazy too, because like, it's like Israelis are just doing it with machines. Like, they don't even have to really do it themselves. They just push buttons from far away. That's it. And they just like Holocaust every day for a year. But I think that is so unbelievably depressing and horrifying and upsetting for all of us, that it can be easy to fall into despair. And I mean, we all do. Like, nobody's running around constantly cheerleading, you know, like, we all feel, and we all feel sad, and we all feel broken. But I think what's so important is the things that we're all capable of doing, we continue to do, whether it's educating people, whether it's organizing, whether it's going to a protest, leading a protest, you know, whether it's, you know, going to a weapons factory and shutting it down, whether it's whatever, whether it's you are somebody with a lot of money and so you donate to everything I just mentioned, you know, whether it's independent media, whether it's having this podcast. These are all so important. And I have to say, like, on a personal level, as horrifying as the last more than a year now has been, after October 7th happened, it was kind of amazing to see how everybody just went to work where they were needed. You know, everybody went to work where they were needed without even really discussing it. Like, we all just know what we're good at, what we can do, who we need to talk to. And we went to work and we did it, and we're still doing it. And like, we can't stop because we have the luxury to continue doing those things. A lot of people don't. Yeah, sorry. I just go. I just want that to be like a good, like, that's like an important point to always go back to. It's a long war. It's a long war. And Israel's not going to win, but that's also not guaranteed. And we can't just sit back and be depressed about it. Like, we have to do something.
I love how you said that. Everybody found something to do, found where they fit in. We've always said, like, you don't have to do everything, but you do have to do something. So find where you fit in and make sure that it makes an impact.
And understand that it's a lifelong struggle. Colonialism is not defeated overnight.
Sure.
It takes hundreds of years sometimes. Sometimes it happens faster. But understand that you are in a long line of people who have resisted colonialism, and that colonialism is the gravest affront to the right of people to their self-determination. And so in that sense, you are engaged in this very noble struggle for freedom. That's what it's about. The Palestinian people know that they have morality and law on their side. We are engaged in a struggle for our freedom. And we need to keep reminding people that it's a freedom struggle. That so much gets lost in the details and the daily headlines and the daily noise. But at the heart of it, we need to keep reminding people that Palestinians are engaged in a freedom struggle.
That's like
Yeah.
on par with what the spokesperson for Hamas said about the International Criminal Court decision. He said, regardless of the possibility of implementation, the ICC arrest warrants for Netanyahu and Gallant, the real truth is that international justice is on our side and against the Zionist entity. The growing awareness and the exposure of the true terrorist nature of the occupying entity serve the Palestinian interests, the future of our cause, and our inevitable goal of liberation, God willing. The occupation state stands against the truth, contradicts the concept of justice, and clashes with human values, and the brutal terrorism that is internationally supported sustains the occupation's existence.
Abu
So,
Ubaidah, well said.
yeah. I think that's a great place
Okay.
to end it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Rania, thank you so much for coming on the pod. We have admired you for so long, and we are just such fans of what you're doing. Thank you, and keep up the good fight.
Thank you guys, and you too. Keep up the good fight.
Thank you so much.
Folks, that is another episode of the pod. Thank you all so much for listening. Check out our full episodes and sources at www.palestinepod.com. Follow us on Instagram at The Palestine Pod. Send us an email at palestinepod@gmail.com. And please support our project on Patreon, www.patreon.com/PalestinePod. That has been another episode of the pod. Thank you all so much for listening. Have as good a day as you can.
We can start telling people to join the Patreon. The show wouldn't be possible without a Patreon. You got to get on our Patreon. Support us on Patreon. You can, because like I've been watching all these other podcasts and they just keep plugging Patreon like all the time.
Yeah, I'm going to clip what you just did right now.
Okay.